At exactly 4:17 a.m. local time, eastern Ukraine stops being a battlefield and becomes the center of the world. For a fraction of a second, the sky turns white, not fire, not lightning, not sunrise, a violent, unnatural white that burns through clouds, concrete, and eyelids alike. Then comes the sound, not immediately. There is always a delay, a strange, silent pause, as if the world itself is inhaling, and then the air explodes. A shockwave surges outward from a point near the outskirts of a shattered industrial zone in eastern Ukraine, a tactical nuclear warhead detonated just meters above ground. For the first time since 1945, a nuclear weapon has been used in war. The warhead is not large by Cold War standards, not a city destroyer like Hiroshima or Nagasaki. This is something different. A low-yield tactical nuclear weapon, estimated between 5 and 15 kilotons, designed not to erase cities, but to break armies, to vaporize bunkers, to annihilate hardened formations, to send a message that conventional war has failed. Within a radius of nearly 2 kilometers, everything disappears. Steel melts like wax. Armored vehicles are lifted, twisted, and scattered like toys. Entire buildings vanish into expanding dust clouds. Temperatures at the center exceed several million degrees for a split second. Human bodies never register pain. They simply cease. The moment after, seconds later, the mushroom cloud begins to rise. Not the towering apocalyptic pillar from Cold War posters, but something far more terrifying in its realism. A thick, boiling column of smoke, debris, soil, and radioactive material climbing rapidly into the dawn sky. Ash and irradiated dust rain back down across fields, streets, forests, and villages. Civilians wake up thinking it is an earthquake, or a chemical plant explosion, or a missile strike gone wrong, until they see the sky. Until the phones begin screaming. Emergency alerts flood Ukrainian networks. Nuclear detonation confirmed. Seek shelter immediately. But it is already too late for thousands. Communications go dark. Within seconds of the blast, the electromagnetic pulse surges outward. Cell towers fail. Power substations trip. Radar stations flicker and collapse. For several minutes, eastern Ukraine becomes a silent black hole on the digital map of Europe. Commanders in Kiev receive fragmented data. Satellite feeds glitch. Drone footage cuts out mid-flight. And then slowly, horrifying clarity returns. Infrared sensors confirm a nuclear signature. Radiation monitors spike. Atmospheric sensors detect fission products. This is not speculation, not misinformation, not propaganda. A nuclear weapon has just been used on European soil. The war changes forever. Until this moment, the war in Ukraine, brutal as it was, remained within the boundaries of conventional conflict. Missiles, artillery, drones, tanks. Now, the line has been erased, and every military headquarters across Europe realizes something terrifying. The nuclear taboo is broken. What was once unthinkable is now precedent, and once a precedent exists, it becomes a strategy. Panic beyond the blast zone. As radiation plumes begin drifting westward, alarms activate across Ukraine's western regions, hospitals initiate mass casualty protocols, shelters fill, borders jam with traffic. People are no longer fleeing artillery. They are fleeing the atom. In Lviv, air raid sirens blare continuously. In Warsaw, over 500 kilometers away, radiation sensors begin registering abnormal fluctuations in the upper atmosphere. Not dangerous yet, but enough to trigger emergency meetings. And fear. Because now everyone understands. If Russia was willing to use a nuclear weapon here, it can use one anywhere. Moscow's message. Less than 40 minutes after the blast, the Kremlin releases a statement. Short, cold, calculated. The Russian Federation has conducted a limited nuclear strike in Ukraine to neutralize existential military threats and restore strategic stability. Any further interference will result in catastrophic consequences. No apology, no hesitation, just a warning. A warning not only to Ukraine, but to the entire West. The world stops breathing in Washington. It is still night. Phones ring in the Pentagon Situation Room. Senior generals rush through secured corridors. The president is awakened. DEFCON protocols shift. Not yet to the highest level, but close enough that every nuclear-armed submarine in the Atlantic and Pacific receives new encrypted orders. In Brussels, NATO headquarters goes into immediate crisis mode. The most powerful military alliance in human history has just witnessed something it was created to prevent, and now it must decide, respond, or accept a nuclear precedent. The Polish border. Europe holds its breath. Nowhere is fear more intense than in Poland, just hours away from the blast zone, just one decision away from becoming the next target. Polish air defense systems are placed on full alert. Patriot batteries go live. F-16 scrambles. Border units prepare for mass contamination control. Hospitals begin distributing iodine tablets. And in Polish cities, people stare at the sky, wondering if the next flash will be closer. The moment that divides history. There is a phrase historians will later use for this moment. The hour the world became nuclear again. Not because this is the largest explosion, but because it is the first crack in the dam. From this point forward, every military action carries a new shadow, a shadow shaped like a mushroom cloud. The question now is no longer if escalation is possible, but whether anyone can stop it. The silence before the storm. For nearly 20 minutes after Moscow's statement, the world says nothing. No retaliation, no response, no NATO declaration, no U.S. speech, just silence. The most terrifying sound in geopolitics, because silence means calculation, and calculation means options are being weighed, including ones humanity hoped were buried forever. For 43 minutes after the explosion, the world does nothing. Not because leaders are frozen, not because militaries are unprepared, but because every decision now carries the weight of extinction. The moment a nuclear weapon enters the battlefield, war ceases to be regional. It becomes existential. NATO's Red Room. Inside NATO headquarters in Brussels, a room rarely shown to cameras is activated. No windows, no journalists, no speeches, only screens, live satellite feeds, radiation dispersion models, Russian force movements, American nuclear readiness levels, and one blinking indicator, strategic escalation probability. It is rising. NATO Secretary General enters flanked by military commanders from the US, UK, France, Germany, Poland, and the Baltic states. The first question is not retaliation, it is confirmation. And the confirmation is absolute. This was nuclear. Article 4 is triggered. Within an hour, Poland formally invokes Article 4 of the NATO Charter. Not Article 5, not war, but consultation. The step before war. It means one member believes its security is under threat, and Poland is not wrong. The radiation plume is drifting toward NATO airspace. Russian forces remain mobilized near its borders. And a nuclear strike has just occurred less than 600 kilometers away. For the first time in history, NATO consults under nuclear fire conditions. The American decision. In Washington, the U.S. President stands in the Situation Room. To his left, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs. To his right, the Secretary of Defense. Across the table, intelligence chiefs. They do not speak about revenge. They speak about credibility. If NATO does nothing, every nuclear-armed state learns that tactical nuclear use carries no consequence. If NATO responds with nuclear force, the world risks cascading escalation. So, the U.S. chooses a third path: maximum conventional force. Carrier strike groups move toward the Mediterranean and Baltic seas. B-2 bombers lift off from Missouri, not with nuclear weapons, but with bunker-busting conventional payloads capable of obliterating Russian command infrastructure. The message is clear. The response will be devastating, but not nuclear. Yet, Russia raises the stakes. Moscow does not remain silent. 4 hours after the blast, Russian strategic forces elevate readiness. Not launch, not fire, but readiness, which in nuclear language means, we are prepared if you are. Russian missile submarines move deeper into the Arctic. Mobile ICBM launchers disperse from their bases. Radar installations activate at maximum power. The world's most dangerous game resumes. China breaks its silence. Then something unexpected happens. Beijing speaks. For decades, China has remained cautious, ambiguous, reserved. Now, its foreign ministry releases a statement. The use of nuclear weapons is unacceptable under any circumstances. China urges immediate de-escalation and warns against further destabilization of the international order. This is not condemnation of NATO, not condemnation of Ukraine. It is a direct warning to Russia, and that changes everything. Because for the first time, Russia is isolated even among nuclear powers. Panic in Europe. While leaders calculate, Europe panics. Stock markets plunge. Flights are grounded across Eastern Europe. Borders clog with vehicles. Supermarkets are stripped bare in Warsaw, Prague, Budapest, and Vienna. Water, canned food, medical supplies, gone in hours. Governments activate civil defense systems unseen since the Cold War. In Germany, emergency broadcast networks return to life. In Sweden and Finland, bomb shelters are opened. In Romania, sirens are tested. The continent is reliving a fear it thought belonged to history books. Ukraine's response. And what of Ukraine? A nation already battered by years of war. Now the first nuclear battlefield in modern Europe. Ukrainian leadership does not respond with rage. It responds with desperation. President Zelensky addresses the nation from an underground bunker, not shouting, not crying, but cold and resolute. Russia has crossed a line that humanity swore would never be crossed again. We will not surrender, and the world must not look away. The message is broadcast in 12 languages, because Ukraine now speaks for more than itself. It speaks for the nuclear age, the dangerous hours, between hours 3 and 6. The world teeters. Every radar anomaly is treated as a potential launch. Every aircraft is tracked. Every submarine movement analyzed. A misinterpreted signal now means catastrophe. And then, a Russian military satellite experiences a malfunction. For 92 seconds, its data feed shows what appears to be multiple missile launches from a NATO naval formation. They are not real. But for those 92 seconds, Russia prepares to respond. This is how close the world comes. Not through aggression, but through error. Why this is different? During the Cold War, nuclear war was theoretical, a shadow looming in strategy rooms and war games. Now it is practical. Now it has been used. And that changes psychology forever, because leaders no longer fear the unknown. They now fear the repeat, and repetition becomes easier with every precedent. The hour of no return. As the 6th hour approaches, NATO reaches a silent internal threshold, a point beyond which restraint begins to look like weakness, a point where deterrence begins to decay. Plans are finalized, targets selected, not nuclear, but devastating. The next move will not end the world, but it will permanently change the war, and possibly the global order. And 6 hours after the first nuclear weapon was used in Europe since 1945, the war enters its most dangerous phase, not because of what has already happened, but because of what must now happen next. The decision. No one wants at NATO headquarters. Silence fills the command room. Not fear, not confusion. Silence, because every voice understands what comes now. NATO will respond, not with nuclear fire, not with symbolic condemnation, but with force so overwhelming that Russia understands a nuclear weapon will never again be a usable tool. The Secretary General speaks quietly. We respond decisively, not to escalate, but to end the illusion that nuclear weapons bring advantage. This is the doctrine now. A new doctrine, written in real time. Operation Iron Resolve. The code name is briefed to Allied commanders. Operation Iron Resolve. A synchronized multi-domain conventional strike targeting Russian missile brigades in occupied Ukraine, air bases used for nuclear delivery, command nodes coordinating strategic forces, radar systems enabling future nuclear launches. No Russian cities, no civilians. Only the machinery of nuclear war. The largest coordinated conventional strike in NATO history begins preparation. The first blows. At hour 7, cruise missiles launch from submarines in the Black Sea and Mediterranean. Stealth bombers penetrate Russian airspace. Cyber operations cripple military communication lines. Russian bases explode across Crimea, Rostov, Belgorod. Not nuclear fire, but precision destruction. Russia's battlefield nuclear capability begins collapsing in real time. The message is unmistakable. You used one nuclear weapon. You will never use another. Russia's dilemma. Inside the Kremlin, a fractured leadership confronts a nightmare. To retaliate with nuclear force is to invite annihilation. To not retaliate is to accept humiliation and loss of strategic credibility. This is the paradox of nuclear weapons. They promise dominance until someone dares to challenge them. And now Russia stands exposed. Their military can respond conventionally, but their nuclear advantage, the threat that once silenced the world, has just failed. The shadow of full war. Russian bombers scramble, missiles are repositioned, but no launch orders come, not yet. Because Russia now understands, the world will tolerate brutality, but it will not tolerate nuclear precedent, and crossing that line twice would not lead to victory. It would lead to extinction. China steps. In 8 hours after the blast, Beijing moves decisively. A private message is delivered to Moscow through secure diplomatic channels. Any further nuclear escalation will result in immediate international isolation, economic termination, and loss of strategic partnership with China. This is not a threat, it is a declaration, and Russia listens, because China is not just an ally, it is Russia's last remaining lifeline. Europe at the edge. Across Europe, governments remain in emergency session, borders tighten, military mobilizations expand, but the mood shifts from panic to grim determination. For the first time since World War II, Europe understands that peace is not inherited. It is defended at a cost. The silence after fire by hour 10. The strikes slow. Russian nuclear units are crippled. Air defenses are exhausted. Both sides pause. Not because the war is over, but because both now understand what war has become. A war where escalation no longer benefits either side. A war where nuclear weapons fail to deliver dominance. A war where survival, not conquest, becomes the goal. The world resets. Markets remain frozen. Air travel suspended. Global supply chains fractured. The damage will echo for decades. But something else has occurred. The nuclear taboo is broken, yet reinforced. Because humanity has now witnessed the cost of crossing that line, and the consequences were immediate, unforgiving, and irreversible. Ukraine does not emerge victorious, but it emerges unbroken. The battlefield nuclear weapon that was meant to end resistance has instead united the world in its defense. More weapons arrive, more alliances form, more lines are drawn. Ukraine becomes not just a nation under attack, but a symbol of the nuclear age's final test. 12 hours after the first nuclear detonation, the world is not destroyed, but it is transformed. The illusion that nuclear weapons guarantee control is gone. The belief that escalation brings advantage is shattered. And the most dangerous lesson has been learned. Nuclear war does not begin with world-ending fire. It begins with one weapon, one decision, one moment of desperation, and survival depends not on strength, but restraint. History will not record this as the moment the world ended, but as the moment humanity stood on the edge and stepped back, barely. Because the next time, there may be no step back left to take.